This tutorial is following the one from last week where we looked at the selection tools, and this one is going to focus our attention on the luminosity selections, and it's simply an introduction to the concept. And so if you will go to the editor mode of the software you're in and look for the File Open command, and as you do that, you will be able to pick the folder that I gave you called Luminosity Images, and in that you will click Open and it will take you to that folder, and in that folder you will find the choices, and I'd like you to choose VJ Swami. And if you don't know how to deal with this as a raw file, stop the recording right now and listen or go back and learn. We're going to go ahead and use Open in Camera Raw for Elements users, or File Open, and when you get to the Open menu, you're going to go and change the format from JPEG to Camera Raw. And so in this image, he has a lot of brightness, and you see the benefit in opening this in Camera Raw is that we get immediate access to this. Remind you, this was a JPEG. If it were a raw file, we'd get much more benefit from reducing the brightness. In order to reduce this brightness here, I'm not going to get back any detail in that part of the sky because I don't have a raw data I'm working on. But I certainly can come in and get rid of some of the extreme brightness. So if you will go to the white slider, which works on the brightest part of the histogram, and hit down the Alter Option key and bring it down, and you see how I'm getting back data in toward the middle of the image along here. In this case, I went all the way. I still have some overexposure, and if you have a current version, at the bottom there are 4 icons, and the second one shows you the before and after. If you click it, you'll see what that looked before we reduced the brights. So we brought them down. If I want to darken some of this extreme spots, I can reduce highlights. But all that does is gray out the area because there's no pixels left to regain. If I come, yes?
On some of ours, we have a red.
Oh, yes. Okay, here. Yeah, the red is, this is the highlight warning, which was turned off on mine temporarily. It's good to turn it on. It shows you where the image is overexposed. And then if I go and take the highlights, that will reduce it further until I get rid of that. And then I lift my hands. All I've done is make that less bright. But you can see I didn't get any detail in the water here, because when you overexpose an image too much, when you capture it, you can never get back the detail in the brights. You can darken them, but you won't get detail back. And that's why it's so critical to check your exposure in camera when you're standing in front of that scene and making a point of keeping the brights within the range of the histogram. And don't worry if it results in some of the shadows are too dark. It's easier to lighten those later than to try to get back brights you didn't record. Okay? And I wanted you to notice there's one obvious error, and this happens frequently when you are on a big scene like this, and that is the horizon isn't straight, right? So let's correct it again. Let's go up to the place that straightens some work. How did I get rid of that crop? I chose the crop tool, and I clicked outside the image. You see the gray area outside? If you have cropped an image and you want to undo it, you grab the crop tool and you click in that outside area, okay? Now I can take the straighten tool and I can follow the horizon just far enough that I know I have a straight line, and it will pick up that line, and to apply that to the image, I go to the hand tool and click. And now I have straightened that horizon. I tend to do that right away when I discover it rather than put it off for later, because it does change the composition of your image. So why is it good to get the horizon straight in camera? You have more control over the composition of the final image, because in order to straighten this, we cut off part of that left side. Not that that makes a big difference, okay? And so in here, I could go ahead and play around, but contrast is going to be difficult to work with here because know that I can't dare raise the brights. And contrast globally, remember, when I'm here, if I add contrast, it's not selective where it adds it. It adds it everywhere. And so your mind should be saying, aha, if I wait till I have Tony Kuiper's luminosity parts, I could select the mid-range of this and only add contrast and the things that aren't bright. And that would be better for this image, to have contrast in here in the waves and not up here in the bright sky. So I say to myself, I could do that later. The only thing else I could do is maybe I could gain back a little blacks. Do you see there's a little gap here? So how do I stretch the dark and black? I go to the black slider. I hold the Alt Option key and I drag those pixels and I get a white screen. And if I go too far, I begin to see pixels appear. And when the oh, you see there down below? I went too far. If I back up till I don't have hardly any of that showing and I lift my hands, I've enriched the blacks. Can you see that in the image? Let's go back to the before and after. And if you don't want to see those in the before and after, you can turn those highlights off. So there's the before, and here's the after. So we made improvements as much as we could on that. So if you'll go and just open that image. Now you can say, you know, I'd like to make some other changes in this, and I could do them with masking. But some of this is normal stuff we've done. How would I lighten the very dark ones? I would go to his levels set, which is going to change exposure. And I would say, what level of darkness do I want to bring most of the change to? And I usually start with Shadow Darks 3. Any darker than that is going to be only this little thing here. And actually, that's mostly in shadow. You really don't need detail on that. The way the light is coming, it isn't on that. So if I want to make any lightening of shadows, I don't want to be extreme. I go to Shadow Darks 3, and I play that. And now, what's going to change? Turn the mask on. Alt Option, click on the mask. So this is where it's going to work. It's not going to affect other things. It's mostly going to work on the real shadows. And so I'm going to say, turn that mask off. Let's see what happens when we actually use this. By going to its thumbnail and double click it, you'll get the adjustments available. And I go to the far end from where the pixels are, and I drag it in toward this. And it will start to drag the very dark things closer to the midpoint, to the gray point. And at some point, I'll like the result. So how do I know when I achieve it? I come up here and turn it off. And that's about all I want. I don't want to end up washing out the darks. They have some vitality to them. So that little bit helps. And if you want to get some contrast in the midpoints, we have a choice of the midpoints that we can work on. So let's do this. Let's go over to the actions and let's change to the brightness and contrast. So turn off levels, turn on brightness and contrast. And we have to say, do we want to err on the side of the brighter midtones or the darker midtones? I suspect the brighter midtones might pick up some detail here. So what do? I go down here where it says mid-tone lights. I also could have chosen mid-tone darks. And the difference is they emphasize one side or the other of the midtones. And we're going to try mid-tone lights. And we're going to play that. And it gives us, because we chose him, it gives us the brightness and contrast adjustment layer with the mask applied. So what's going to change? Alt Option, click on the mask. The area that is in mid-tone range, and is it going to be a drastic change? It's grayed out enough that it's going to be a very gentle change, not sudden. And it's evenly picking the things that are just a bit lighter than mid-tone. So let's see. See, it doesn't affect these over here. That's so important. You don't want to add any brightness over in this area. So we're going to turn off the mask by Alt-Option, click on the mask. Double click in the front where the actual adjustment layer is. And this is the tools. Let's add a little brightness in that area, but let's really knock up the contrast in that area, okay? And let's see what it did to the image. Turn it off and turn it back. And you have to decide if you overdid it. You also can lower brightness. Sometimes you lower brightness and increase contrast till you get the effect you like. And you could go less contrast. You look at the water in this middle area. I'm going to raise the contrast in that area. Can you see what it does? It gives much more interest to the water part. And it does not touch the brights. And if you think the brights are too bright in the midtone area, look at the sky. I can zero here. If you want to go back to where they were, I always type a 0 in here. This is before we played with it. You can lower the brightness a little if you think that adds a little more interest to it, and up the contrast, or any combination of that. And when you're done, this is where you check the before and after. It's subtle. It's not going to be an overwhelming change, but it's those subtle changes that you get. Now, there's one other thing I knew had to be done in this image, this dumb flare. It ruins the whole thing. And what I did with it was one of my favorite tricks for getting rid of a really bright spot. Example, a macro shot, and there's a bright leaf in the background that got all the adjustment from the foreground. And you want that one bright leaf darkened. This is the most natural way that I do to it. First of all, I want to work on pixels. What do I have to do to work on pixels? I have to add that composite layer, which they call a stamp visible. I call it composite. Go to the top layer, make it active. Apply those 4 keys, Shift for everybody, Control or Command, and Alt or Option, and an E. Now, I'm going to clone a little bit of the gray over that bright thing because it is a natural color I'm taking from the image. So go and add above this composite a plain new layer. That's that torn piece of paper. And I do that because if I make any errors, I can erase them. I'm not working directly on those pixels. So on this, I'm going to take a clone stamp tool at a very low opacity. So come on over here. It looks like a rubber stamp. And if you click on it, you come down. And if you have played with these things and they're all messed up, you can always reset them to their default. And in Elements, it's this middle icon at the right. And on full Photoshop, you go up to the top of this menu, and you've got a little caret that pops the menu out. And it will say to you, Reset Tool. Not all tools, Reset Tool. And that means this is the way it was intended to be used originally. And the one thing we must do to the original settings is sample all layers. What it does for me is gives me the normal default for using this tool. And I know I'm working on a separate layer, so I click Sample All Layers. And then I say, how much am I going to add of this over here? And I told you very low opacity. I bring it down to less than 10, if I can get that low, about 10%. And then I zoom in on the problem over here. So I can really see it. I'm at 50%, enough to really see what I'm doing. I have to go back and recheck the clone because if you click the zoom tool, you have to go back and check the clone stamp again. But it's all set the way I want it. And I get rid of Align. Align says if I keep clicking, my original sample point is going to move as I move where I paint. I don't want to eventually pick up the bright. I want to keep picking up this area. So for this job, I don't want my sample point to move. So I get rid of Aligned. And now if I pick up pixels here, and I release my mouse button, and I pick them up again, they'll stay there. They won't go shifting around the screen. So I have to be bigger than this. And I like to go about close to the size of the problem. Maybe that's a bit too close to the size of the problem. I come over here in the gray area, and I say Alt, Option, click, and that will give me pixels from there at 10% opacity. I come back here, and I hardly see any change, which is what I wanted. I keep going, and I keep going, and it comes down. Can you see it coming down? And I have to decide how much does it need to come down to stop obtruding the image. And as I do this, I'm approaching that gray, but I won't get there very fast at 10%. So you decide when that gets rid of the obstruction. How do I know? I have to go back to viewing it at the full screen. So fit on screen. And then I say, did I do the job? Where did I do the work? On this layer, right? Let's hide it. And then bring it back. If that got rid of that problem, we know we've got flare, lens flare. We've got to use it. It's there. But now at least it doesn't strike us immediately. And I do this whenever I have a tiny spot that is way too bright. I simply clone over it on a separate layer using very low opacity, which allows me to keep brushing over and over till I get it down as much as I want. It doesn't do it all at once. I build it up, and I got rid of the aligned because I wanted, no matter where I was clicking, it would keep picking up the same pixels each time. And that, if you're taking pixels and putting them over another part of the image, you want to be sure that if you don't want to move the sample point, you want to get rid of that. If you had plaid and you had to pick up the exact plaid as you moved, you'd want it aligned. But for this, I get rid of the alignment. That's all I was going to do with this particular one. So let's close it and not save it. Don't save. File open will take you back to Luminosity images, and this time we will choose from that particular set of images the one that's called Zion Narrows. Here's the image, and I don't want to change the lighting in this back area. I want to make this at least look like there's leaves there, but I don't want to grossly make it. It's in the shadow. Did my eye see leaves when I looked at the scene? Absolutely, because my eye is able to adjust to the darkness and bring out detail. All I want to do is bring back the detail the human eye saw, even though it was in the shadow. And so I've set up here that we're going to use Tony Kuiper's actions, and we're going to go to the levels group. So if you follow along and be sure we close up brightness and contrast, whatever you used before, and open the levels. And I close the other ones up because we have limited space here in this panel, and I don't want it to be used with something I'm not using. And I said, let's check out the darks 2, 3, and 4. So how do you check them out? You come down here and you either control click or command click all 3 of those. So you get all 3 adjustments, and then you play those 3 layers of levels. And if this is bothering you, this panel, if you go to the right of here and double click, it drops. You can open these panels. There's a plain area over here, and if I double click that, it collapses that panel. I don't need it right now, and I want to see everything up here. So what do? Which one of these will give me the result I want? Let's look at darks 2 with that switch. Alt Option, click on the mask. Far too much is going to change, right? I said I don't want to change the rocks in the back. That's much too effect on the back. Turn it off and get your picture back. Test Shadow Darks 3. It's still picking up too much of the back. Turn it off, go up to Super Darks 4. Look how much less that's going to affect the back. and it's going to affect here. And if I don't like what it does up here when I'm done, how can I get rid of that? I can paint it black on the mask. But I'm not going to do that because I might like, those are dark shadows up there. I might like that. So I'm going to get the picture back. Alt-Option, click on the mask. And now the magic comes. Open the thumbnail. Look at how selective that is. These are the pixels. Really dark pixels have been chosen. Grab the white dot, the other end, and start to drag them in. And as you get closer to that, you'll begin to see the shadows change. Can you see them? Now, you have to have a good memory, which is why you should always work on your images soon after a trip, because you have still, the older you get, the sooner you have to work on them after a trip. You want to remember what it looked like when you looked at it. It also means when you're out looking at your scenes, pay attention with your eyes. Say, what do I see in that tree? I need to know what I see so I know how to adjust it later. And if I wonder, is that enough? I come up to this eyeball for that layer. I turn it off and I turn it on. And actually, that's about enough. Do you think that that's probably what you saw in the shadows? Turn it off. If I go, I can always go further. If I go further, it's going to get, at some point, that's too light. At least I don't think I saw that much. But you have total charge. I'm still just, that gray point is just touching the pixels. So that's within the range of what I consider doesn't damage it. And it's up to you to decide what you think is right and leave it at that point. And then let's go back to the bottom here and turn. You want to see the before and after? Remember this? Alt-Option, click on the background eyeball. There's the before and there's the after. And look at that shadow at the top. Does that look okay? Yeah, I think the little bit of light in that shadow is good. So in this case, I keep it. If we did that and I said, darn it all, I want that totally black, you now know what I would do. I would play the mask. I would take a black brush and I would block over this and knock it out. So that's the mask I would have to look at. Yeah, I knew it wasn't that bright. If I didn't want that, I would paint the mask black and hide it. So you do have control, but in this case, I really like what it did to the dark shadows up there. It brought some life back to them without damaging the rest of the image. Can you see that? How carefully it doesn't? And be aware, if it even slightly changes any of this area, I could always paint the mask black. What you want to do, this is the midpoint and this is the bright point. You want to bring these pixels closer to the midpoint to lighten them. And then I just do it more delicately by doing it gradually this way. It just gives me a little more control. Yeah, good questions. And I appreciate your asking them because they're the ones that will strike people as they're wondering. So close Zion Narrows. Don't save because you want to be able to work with it as a practice.